Jalen Milroe, one of the more interesting. Look, I spent a little time with him at the Super Bowl. And, as we get to interview people at the Super Bowl, as they walk away, oftentimes with the rookies, I immediately think, how's that guy going to do in interviews next year? And certain guys have it. Boy, you spend 10 minutes talking to Jalen Milroe, and you're like, yep, he's going to thrive in interviews. Like, he's got there's a focus, there's a clarity to the way he puts his point across. Like, he's obviously polished and smart and ready to go on these things. And as he walked away from me at the Super Bowl, I thought, man, he's going to impress. And what do you know? Now we hear stories out of the combine that, Jalen Milroe really impressed a lot of people. I'm not talking about his film. I'm just talking about they get that 15 minutes in the room, and it seems like he's really helped himself with those 15 minutes that he got with different teams.
Yeah, I agree with you. I talked to Jalen Milroe at the Senior Bowl and was super impressed by the humility, which is not the case with necessarily every quarterback in this class, and really just thought he understood what it took. He understood the work ethic he's going to need to improve. And what's interesting to me is that when you look at where Jalen Milroe is at now, the athleticism is off the charts. I mean, I had someone tell me that they believed that Jalen Milroe's athleticism is better than Anthony Richardson's. Now, remember, Anthony Richardson was drafted 4th overall by the Indianapolis Colts. The problem is they don't believe he's ready as a passer. And so then you have to ask yourself, are you drafting a guy for a passing role? Are you drafting a guy for an athletic role? And what is he doing at the beginning? And are you drafting more in mind of what can you do in 2025 or what can you do over the span of 3, 5, 7 years? And so I had a NFC executive I was talking to who told me that they remembered when teams were interviewing Jalen Hurts in the combine. And Jalen Hurts was obviously an extremely athletic prospect coming out, although he was a more developed passer and a more accomplished passer than Jalen Milroe is at this point. But someone asked Jalen Hurts, would you be open to playing other roles while we develop you as a passer? And according to this executive, Jalen said, I'm a quarterback. Now, Jalen Hurts is a quarterback. He's a Super Bowl MVP winning cornerback. I'm not doubting that. But I think when you get to Jalen Milroe, who maybe has a little more rawness as a passer, there are teams who are saying, hey, if you're willing to give me 12 snaps a game at a mix of some sort of wildcat package, punt return, et cetera, different things that you can do, I'm committed to developing you in the quarterback room. So you'll still be in the quarterback room in terms of meetings. I'll still work with you to become the passer that you want to be. Because by the way, if you can become a great passer and a great quarterback, or even a good passer and a great quarterback because your athleticism is buoying you, that's a win for you. But I need you to agree that you're going to help me out on that other front. And the executive had a great quote when they talk about not rushing that development, which is that quote, it's just like if you're cooking a certain meal, you can't rush it. Too many times people are like, I know I'm supposed to make this at 350 degrees, but I'm turning it up to 450. When the executive told me this, I felt super seen because I absolutely like to ramp things up to 405 no matter what I'm cooking because it is time for that food to be ready.
Don't do it. Don't do it, Jori. You got to be patient. You got to let it cook. You got to let it cook the right way. It doesn't taste the same, Jori. You got to have a little patience.
Let Jalen Milroe cook. Let everybody cook.
But I will say to that end, I know I've been hard on quarterbacks in this draft. I've consistently through the College Football Power Hour, on this show, on every radio interview I do, I'm hard on quarterbacks in this year's draft. I believe I believe most of these quarterbacks can actually really be successful if they're drafted somewhere where they're asked not to play for a year or two and they get to develop into the best version of themselves. Like, I think if you look at the fatal flaws on tape for Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, go up and down the list, they've all got a list of fatal flaws. Now, if you took the time to work those out in a world where there's not the same level of eyeballs and pressure and you can bring that quarterback along slowly, like, I think they'd all have a shot. My fear with whoever gets drafted, if we are in a world where Cam and Shedeur and guys like that get drafted in the top half of the first round, if that ends up happening, the expectation, right or wrong, the expectations in the timeline change. I wish I could change that, but I can't, right? So to me, if you're talking about Jalen or Jackson or Shedeur or Cam, and you're telling me, yeah, they actually end up going to an organization where they're not asked to start right away. They get a couple of years to figure it out. They develop slowly, and they come along and they become the best version of themselves. I would say a lot of these guys can be really good quarterbacks. I fear that that's not the situation we're going to end up in. If Jalen Milroe gets drafted somewhere where he's not asked to play year one, I would at that point throw confetti up if I were Jalen, because it gives him a real opportunity to make it in the league.
I completely agree, Fitz, and I think that there's a case to be made that you are better off as a quarterback if you are getting drafted back half of the first round into the second and having that opportunity. I understand that there is a financial implication to getting drafted earlier. And I understand some of the factors in terms of general manager and head coach buy-in, but I just think we see so many top of the first round quarterbacks fail because they're not given the time, they're not given the structure to succeed. There's too much pressure on them. And what I would say to people who look at last year and say, well, Jaden Daniels was more ready than we thought. Well, Bo Nix was more ready than we thought. Michael Penix might have been ready by the end of the year. I think there's a case that just like Saquon Barkley is an outlier, not a trend, last year's quarterback class was an outlier, not a trend. It felt crazy at the time how many guys were drafted in the first 12. That's 6 guys drafted in 12 spots. But some of this is between NIL and COVID and different factors in the college game. We just had a lot of the guys who are talented and ready to play come out in the same year. We do not have that this year. So I don't think that we should get too ahead of ourselves saying that because all these first round rookies were ready last year, that means we should get more guys in the first round this year. And to the contrary, I think that the teams, when I'm talking to them, are saying, look, passer alone, some people think Jalen Milroe is like 3rd, 4th round on the passing level. Athleticism, 1st round. So the range I was getting for him was late 1st, and then some people were saying mid to late 2nd. Well, that makes perfect sense because Lamar Jackson was drafted 32nd with a similar level of athleticism and slightly better passing. And Jalen Hurts was drafted in the 50s with, again, similar athleticism, though you could argue who's more athletic between them, and Jalen was a slightly better passer. And so also, if you're Jalen Milroe and you get drafted in that range, look at where Lamar is at. MVP of the league twice already. Look at where Jalen Hurts is at. 2 Super Bowl appearances, a Super Bowl title, and a Super Bowl MVP. Good things can happen to quarterbacks drafted late in the 1st round and into the 2nd.
Yeah, I love that point. And I'll reiterate again, it's the expectation change that I think is so wild. And look, a year ago right now, as we were doing this show, we were saying that there was no chance that any of those top 3 teams were going to trade out. We were saying that on the show because everybody had a good sense that Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, by the time we got to the draft, J.J. McCarthy, even Bo Nix, by the time we got, there was a presumption that most of these quarterbacks were just different. And this year's class needs a little bit more development. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think you got to be aware of it and give it to them.